Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our strategic webinar on sustainable aviation fuel, also called SAF. My name is Marilyn Bastin, and I'm the Head of Aviation Sustainability in EUROCONTROL, and I would like to thank you for joining us today. In this webinar, we aim to explore the huge potential of sustainable aviation fuel for driving down aircraft emission and speeding up the decarbonization of the aviation sector. Along with future hybrid electric or hydrogen power aircraft, SAF, made from renewable feedstock or synthetic fuel, is one of the most important short-term options to significantly reduce emission. SAF is a so-called drop-in fuel, which means that it can be blended with fossil jet fuel. And since the first commercial flight operated by KLM in 2011, more than 150,000 flights were powered by SAF. In addition to the reduction of total life cycle CO2 emission, SAF can also reduce direct emission, particulate matter with up to 90% and sulfur, SOx, with 100% compared to conventional jet fuel. Reducing this emission will also positively impact local air quality in areas with high density of flight movement, such as airports. However, this potential is largely untapped, as such fuel represents only 0.05% of total jet fuel consumption. In our Eurocontrol data snapshot published last June, we noticed that in 2019, just 39 of 1,657 EU airports accounted for 80% of the volume of conventional fuel used by aircraft departing from EU airports. However, only 7 of these 39 airports have started to supply SAF. On the other side, we also hear criticism and concern about sustainable aviation fuel. Are biofuel really sustainable? How to reduce the cost of SAF? How to avoid competition between transport modes to get access to enough feedstock? How to avoid economic tankering? Last July, the Fit for 55 package, including 13 initiatives, of which 5 with direct effect on aviation, has been published by the European Commission to support the implementation of the European Green Deal. How quickly can we expect the uptake and production of SAF to increase, and what will be the impact of the ReFuel EU Aviation Initiative in this context? For this timely discussion, we have lined up 3 top players from the aviation world and the European Commission, who will be provided a clearer picture of what is planned on the regulatory, operational, and manufacturing level in order to boost the production and supply of sustainable aviation fuel and get us closer to aviation's decarbonization goal. With our panelists, and thanks to your active participation, we will address the following question. How can we tap on SAF potential to reduce aircraft emission? How can we increase airlines' uptake of SAF? How will the ReFuel EU initiative help boost the supply and demand for sustainable aviation fuel in the EU? What are the key challenges and opportunities on a global level? So it's my pleasure to introduce Mrs. Flor Diaz-Pulido, Head of Aviation Policy Unit at the European Commission in DG Move. She is in charge of sustainability policies of the aviation sector and the internal market of aviation and airport services, including coordination with ICAC and ICAO. She has been working for the European Commission since 1995. She joined the Directorate General for Transport and Energy in 2000, focusing mainly on aviation and maritime transport, internal market, competition law, consumer affairs related to transport and passenger rights. Then I would like to introduce Mr. Jonas Abrahamsson, CEO of Swedavia. He has been president and CEO of Swedavia since January 2017. Prior to his appointment at Swedavia, he has been working for the energy industry for 25 years and as CEO of E.ON Sweden since 2010. He has extensive leadership background and experience of managing large infrastructure investment in both a Swedish and international environment. And finally, I would like to introduce Mr. Brian Moran, Vice President, Global Sustainability Policy and Partnerships in Boeing. In this new role, Mr. Moran leads a diverse global team that elevates and showcases Boeing's focus on sustainability. This includes informing the global policy landscape and deepening partnerships to advance Boeing's sustainability objectives, such as the scaling of sustainable aviation fuel. So each panelist will make a 5-minute presentation, and then I will open the floor to a question and answer session. Some of you have already sent some questions, and I would like to thank you for this. We will try to address some of these questions. So for your question, you can shape the discussion in the question and answer box. And for any technical problem, you can enter your question in the chat function. So now I'm sure you are impatient to listen to our panelists, and then I would like to give the floor to our first guest, Mrs. Flor Diaz-Pulido. Flor, the floor is yours. Flor, you just disappeared now. This is good. This is live, direct. Flor, we just lost you. I don't hear you. Your microphone, I think. I'm still not hearing you. We don't hear you, Flor. It's a problem because I don't hear you. Maybe we can switch to the next panelist and we will come back to you after, Flor. Sorry for this. So I would like to give the floor to Mr. Jonas Abramson. So please, Jonas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marilyn, and thank you for having me here discussing this very important topic. I mean, definitely it's trying times for the aviation industry. The COVID-19 pandemic has put the whole industry through a crisis of unprecedented proportions. And even though the pandemic is rocking the foundations of the aviation industry, we are also in the midst of another crisis. And that one is truly existential, the climate crisis, of course. And regardless of what line of business we're in, global warming needs to be at the very top of our agenda. For the aviation industry, it might feel like we are thrown out of a frying pan into the fire, but frankly, we have no choice but to commit and engage, and we need to be doing it now. Air travel is way too important not to be part of the solution. And for sure, it is a huge challenge, but on the other hand, we do have many tools at hand. Not one single silver bullet, though, and I think we need to understand, as you said in your introduction, we need to work on everything from energy efficiency to new technologies such as electrification and hydrogen. But I would say that here and now, it is SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, that has the greatest potential to make a real difference. It is based on existing technology, it is well proven, it is compatible with the existing aircraft and fueling infrastructure. So no major changes to aircraft and airports that would delay broad sector use from a technology perspective exist. And that's a huge benefit, of course. At the same time, we do realize that there are some huge commercial challenges. Today, SAF is too expensive, to be frankly. It is not competitive with traditional jet fuel. It's costing up to 4 times traditional jet fuel. And in order to crack that, we need to make sure that we get to large scale local production in order to bring down cost, improve competitiveness, and increase available volumes. Because after all, if we are going to make a real difference, huge volumes are needed. And here I think there are 2 important levers that need to be worked upon, both the demand side and the supply side. On the demand side, I do think that blending mandates can be part of the solution to create the necessary market and provide investors with confidence that the demand will be there in the future. But I also believe that you need to work on the supply side. And there, I think there will be a need for CapEx support and incentives. And quite frankly, being in an industry that has been hardly hit by this pandemic, I think actually also policymakers should realize that more carrots are needed. We cannot only see sticks in this industry. And important to point out again, this is not the one single solution to reduce CO2 emissions from air travel. I think we need to see a variety of fuels and technology innovations making headway in the years ahead, but SAF is definitely going to be one of the most important ones. I think also my final point would be that we need also to make sure that we incentivize feedstock and sustainable fuels with low greenhouse gas emissions from a life cycle perspective. And we should avoid to have the cheapest bio-raw material being used. No shortcuts can be afforded. We don't have time for that, and we cannot jeopardize the trust. So what do we as an airport operator do? Of course, we cannot do everything, but everybody can do something. And I think cooperation is key. What we have done is that we have since 2016 procured SAF for our own business travel. And since 2019, we have also invited others to join our tender process to get access to SAF volumes a bit more easily. We have also introduced incentive programs for airlines so that they can get benefits in our airport charges if they use SAF. And we will soon see also differentiated airport charges fees at our airports. I think together we can and we will transform the aviation industry because quite frankly, there is simply no alternative. And SAF will for sure play an important role, and cooperation both across the value chain and between businesses and politics will be key in that transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonas. I think you are perfectly right. So the global warming means climate change must be at the top of our agenda, and we need to act now. It's really the time, and SAF is one of the most promising solutions to do this. So thank you very much for sharing your view, Jonas. And then I would like to give the floor to Mr. Brian Moran. So Brian, the floor is yours, and we will come back to floor later on. At least I hope so.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Wonderful. Hey, first, a big thank you to the team at EUROCONTROL, and congratulations to Eamon and the whole gang for producing these webinars, for producing together with Andrew Charlton the Straight Talk. I don't know about you guys on the line, but over the last year and a half, I found a lot of these seminars sort of must-see lockdown TV. And you guys do a really good job for av geeks like myself to bring a lot of interesting topics together. So big shout out to EUROCONTROL. And also, again, thank you to my fellow panelists. I hope Flo can make it still, and then Jonas and to you. So look, SAF, as you've heard Boeing say for a long, long time, in our view, is a key ingredient to decarbonizing aviation. You know, as the entire ecosystem moves towards the middle of the century and commits to a net zero posture, for us, there are really four levers that we have to pull, that we can pull. And it starts with fleet renewal, unsurprisingly. You know, we just published our 20-year outlook last week, and the world, you know, despite the unprecedented impact from the pandemic, air travel is so resilient. The world is looking for 43,500 airplanes over the next 20 years. Now, when you combine the growth as well as the replacement in that's about an 80% fleet renewal of older airplanes coming out and new technology. Every generation bringing 15 to 25% improvements over the prior generations and airplanes that it replaces. So fleet replacement is a key pillar of that decarbonization journey. Operational efficiencies and EUROCONTROL, you're so at the forefront of this. In your own words, you're looking at about 8 to 10% operational improvements if we only leverage the technology that's inherent in these modern airplanes. If from a regulatory perspective, we had the ability to fly more direct routes. So operationally, there's a lot to be had, and 10% is a lot. We sometimes think that that's in the margins. We fight for every percent in new product development. So operationally, there's a lot there. The third pillar is advanced technology, and that's from battery electric propulsion, where in Boeing's case, we have a joint venture with Wisk on the core vehicle, a urban air mobility, all-electric airplane that we've been flying over 1,500 flights, or all the way to hydrogen, where we have a long sort of history of developing prototypes, studying both hydrogen propulsion, as we did with a Phantom Eye autonomous airplane, or indeed using fuel cells, as we did on a 737 to power an auxiliary power unit. But, and let's get to the point, SAF, even though we always say there is no silver bullet, if you had to pick one, it might just be SAF. Because as Jonas rightly said, it's drop-in. We, over the years, have certified 7 different pathways. We have well understood and sorted through the sustainability criteria of feedstock. You know, as a company, we helped fly the first product on SAF all the way back to 2008. And since then, certified more pathways. We've flown on 100% blend. Right now, as you probably know, 50% blends are certified and approved. But we have actually flown on 100% in 2018, so we know it's doable. And as a company, we've committed that every airplane that we're going to deliver from 2030 onwards will be 100% SAF capable. So I'm really honored to join this panel today, and with Floor joining hopefully in a little bit, getting to talk a little bit about some of the policy incentives, some of the policy mechanisms that have been rolled out. Certainly, ReFuel EU is a very promising start. There are, I think, a number of opportunities for us that we can discuss here, and I want to give Floor the benefit of, as I see her join, maybe catch her up, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Thank you, Brian, for first of all for the acknowledgement of the Eurocontrol work, because indeed there is a big team behind the screen working, preparing all this webinar, talk show, and so on, and it takes a lot of energy. So thank you very much. I think it's very much appreciated by everyone working within Eurocontrol, working to prepare all this session. And also, it's good to hear your message that also for Boeing, SAF is quite important, and you're also working on this 100% SAF flight, which is indeed quite promising and needs to be developed, of course. So thank you very much. And then I really hope we can have Floor now and that the technical issue is solved. So Floor, can you speak up now?
Can you hear me?
Perfectly, this is fine. Thank you very much for your patience.
No, Marilyn, on the contrary, it has been a nice adventure. I have got to hack a computer from a colleague in order to be able to be with you live today. So,
okay, but it's very much appreciated. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marilyn, Brian, all the people joining today. Marilyn has given us 5 minutes, so I've decided to come with five ideas. The first one is that we are going through an economic revolution. Some people still talk about crossroads. I believe that the crossroad is behind us. We are really now going down a clear path, a clear road, and there is a change in society and a change in economy that makes that we are not any longer in the same kind of geopolitics or in the same kind of societal behavior that we had at the beginning of this century. And this path is very clear in Europe, but we see that more and more the whole global, the planet is going into the climate change revolution because it is an economic revolution at the same time. And we know that aviation, the times where we thought that we could just pay for our carbon and wait and decarbonize later because it is more complicated for aviation than other sectors, those times are really long gone. Now we really need to commit to decarbonize ourselves, and from the European Commission perspective, the best way to do that is through aviation liquid fuels. And this is because we know that there are several and different promising technologies. We talk a lot about electricity, we talk a lot about hydrogen, different kind of hydrogens, either direct hydrogen, either electricity powered by hydrogen or power to liquid. But at the end of the day, we still believe that these technologies will mature little by little from here to 2050, but we will still depend on aviation, on liquid fuels by 2050. and maybe even a little bit longer than that. And we need to start decarbonizing now. We cannot wait until hydrogen is available. We cannot wait until electricity is available. So these sustainable liquid fuels are really key. And we know that the technology has been there for at least 10 years now. So really the question is why? Why we have not been able to break this chicken and egg situation? We think that it is due to a double issue. We have an economic issue and we have a regulatory issue. From the regulatory perspective, I mean, we all know, we know that there was not enough demand because the prices were too high, and there is not enough supply because there was not enough demand. But we know that from the European Union perspective, we have tried to deal with this problem from a horizontal framework until now. And we know that if we get into a horizontal framework like the Renewable Energy Directive that covers all economic sectors, then the business case for decarbonizing aviation, the business case for producing SAF for aviation will never be as strong as the business case of producing SAF for cars and road transport, for instance, because clearly cars are the lion part in the transport carbon, and therefore we are a niche market. We were so small, or we are so small until now, that the market forces were not able to go ahead on their own. And this is why we in the European Commission, we came with the idea of come up with an ad hoc legislation, which is ReFuel Aviation, the proposal that we tabled in July this year, that will establish obligatory targets only for aviation. And we believe that that is for the regulatory aspect. I mentioned two, regulatory and economic. From the economic angle, we are working on what we call the Sustainable and Low Carbon Sustainable Fuels Alliance. We think that by the end of the year, we will be able to set up this platform. And we hope that by bringing all stakeholders together, public and private, we will be able to mobilize the necessary financing and research, etc., to make SAF a reality. And I am getting to my final fifth idea, Marilyn, and this is that we cannot do it alone. We know that the revolution, as I mentioned at the beginning, is going on worldwide, but we know that aviation is a global economic sector. And therefore, we can dream wild in Europe, but we cannot dream alone. We need to support, and this we are strongly committed to support to all the efforts going on through ICAO, from the long-term goal for CORSIA, for SAF. We really believe that ICAO is the place where our European ambition to decarbonize and to do it through the best economic means will really materialize for the future. And these are my 5 minutes. So thank you again, Marilyn, and back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Flor. Thank you for sharing these 5 ideas. I think they are quite interesting and get a better idea about what was the objective of the ReFuel EU initiative. So thank you very much. And indeed, collaboration is the key. We are all in the same boat or flight if we want to speak about sustainable aviation fuel. And so thank you very much. And then I would like to propose then we start our question and answer session. I see already many questions that are filled in the box, so don't hesitate to shape the discussion following the 3 interesting discussion that we just have. And I see that indeed we will have many topics to discuss, but I will try to collect all the ideas because some questions are quite similar to each other. Anyway, we also received some questions in advance, so I will also select some of these questions in advance. But I will start with one question from the chat because it's a question that is coming back regularly. It's about the Destination 2050 report and the commitment to have 83% of SAF by 2050. Is it a realistic goal? And I must say, we have just seen the announcement of a coalition yesterday to have 10% of SAF by 2030. So we can see many different announcements in the media about 10%, 20% of SAF, 15% of SAF, and then this 83% of SAF by 2050. So maybe I can ask the question to Flor. Do you think it is realistic? and why for the ReFuel EU initiative, the number are a little less ambitious?
Yes, thank you, Marilyn, for the question. I think it is important to understand from the outset that when different targets are put on the table, they may have a different nature, and they may different in the degree of compulsory. So in our proposal, we are coming up with obligatory targets. In many other proposals, we are talking about aspirational targets. And we believe because our targets in the ReFuel Aviation are obligatory, we believe that we wanted to start by targets that were possible without rocketing too much the market and without putting into jeopardy the sustainability criteria. We really want to bring the most sustainable fuels into aviation. And if you see our proposal, we have, for instance, excluded what we call first generation for different reasons. And this is a second difference. So the first one is aspirational versus obligatory. The second one is what we are talking about when we talk about SAF. It depends on how you define the sustainability criteria, on the kind of feedstock you are getting into the definition. We in the European Commission, we have bet our money for the highest level of sustainability and for obligation to create the certainty that is lacking in the market. So this is why we believe that with our 2, 5, 20%, we are creating a platform. And on top of that, member states and the market forces, they can come up with voluntary agreements and with commercial agreements. So we have tried to give a lot of commercial freedom to the market while ensuring the minimum obligatory to kick the ball rolling. Others can come up with different, but it will be voluntary and private.
Thank you, Flor. Thank you, Flor. I think it's quite clear. And I have a question for Boeing here that we have received in advance. Boeing has been investing in SAF for a long time. What are your views of the ReFuel EU proposal, and will it achieve its objective to scale SAF? So, Brian, I think this question is for you.
Yeah, look, first of all, I think we welcome the level of ambition and sort of the comprehensive nature of the Fit for 55 package as a whole, but then ReFuel EU in particular, because it does a lot of things. It recognizes that SAF is the most near-term and most viable answer. And maybe just to pause on that for just a quick second, I think the prior question was really good, but you also have to think about the technical limitations that you're dealing with. So whether it's 63 or 83, at some point you start with what can you achieve by 2050 through electric and through hydrogen, and the rest is a fallout. And that's why, even as recently as yesterday, a coalition of more than 60 entities, including Boeing and many, many others, have come together and said, if you draw that curve to where we need to get to, you got to get to about 10% by 2030. And then as you map it out, you end up in that neighborhood. But back to your question, Marilyn, I think the Commission has done a really nice job with ReFuel EU on a number of levels. The sustainability criteria and recognizing the importance of the sustainability of feedstock is vital. I think the recognition that this is an industrial scaling problem, not a technical problem. Because for a long time, we've been debating that, and I think that's now behind us, given the success of flights. And a couple of areas, though, where I'd love Flor's views and have a conversation around is, I think it begins to recognize the challenge and the competition with road, and that road is a hard to abate sector too, but road has alternatives. Road has electric, and with the ground electrifying, I think there's an opportunity in the co-legislation process to still recognize that aviation needs sort of a disproportionate level of incentives to keep the playing field level. We all want a level playing field, but we're not starting from the same base. So I think that's one point. And then the other one that Jonas made, when we look around the globe, we see different policy mechanisms taking hold. And in places where you do have mandates, having incentives that complement those and that stimulate the offtake and reduce the green premium early in the process. We saw this with solar. There's a study by Bill Gates's Breakthrough Energy that looked at, had we just put $5 billion into solar in 1990, we could have reduced the cost per kilowatt hour by almost 50%. And that was early investment. So the amount of money we're putting in early and near term matters. And that's one reason why Boeing in its own right invested recently in a partnership with Sky Energy here, based right here in the Netherlands, for an offtake agreement, but also to look around the globe where else we can go scale SAF.
Thank you, Brian. When it comes to the uptake of SAF, I think I have a question more here for Jonas. Swedavia has been a pioneer in establishing technical requirements for the procurement of SAF. You have also developed best practices for common bids, which enable smaller airports to access SAF. Would you envisage sharing this knowledge?
Yeah, I think for us, where we came from when we started this was that we saw in Sweden very early a debate about climate issues with flying. You know, flight shame was invented here for good reasons, but at that point in time, we felt that it was very important to demonstrate that you can take sustainability issues for serious without just staying on ground. There are alternatives there, and we need to make that visible. And hence, we started already back in 2016 to procure the amount of SAF that we used in our own businesses when in our business traveling. And that has been successful in terms of demonstrating that it can be done. Obviously, there are limits to how much volume, but so far that has not been a problem. The problem has been that nobody really knew that it was possible. So I think that created some momentum. And then going further down the road, what we have done lately is that we have, as I said, we have tried also then to invite others. So it's easy to stand on the sideline and have views of what politicians should do, but start at your home turf. What can you do? And all businesses, all public institutions can start by actually saying, okay, when we fly renewable. And hence, we invited everybody to join our tender because it's not always straightforward these days how you do it. And that has been rather successful, although we would have hoped for even more companies and institutions to join us. So, and how we have done that, it's all on our webpage, so anybody can go in there and steal with pride. I think this is not a competition. We are in the same boat or flight, as you said. So let's work together and steal with pride wherever we can.
Thank you, Jonas. I see also some question about the certification of aircraft. So I think this is more for Brian. Were there any significant obstacle to overcome to enable Boeing, engine suppliers and airlines to collaboratively approve the use of SAF? And for the 100 SAF certification, what is really the issue for this?
Yeah, look, I mean, we're moving human lives across the globe, so that the safety aspects of what we do and the certification, working with the regulators and informing regulators, is probably the most important thing we as OEMs can do. And yeah, of course, it's been an incredible journey for now 10 years since the first fuel was certified with the engine manufacturers, with other suppliers, but we got there, and we have 7 different pathways that are now certified, and to the 50% blend. Now, as we're looking ahead, and as I said, we've already flown a 777 freighter in 2018 on 100% sustainable fuels. But that was one flight, that was a test flight. To do that repeatedly in an ecosystem where different fuel blends could be available at different airports. You could go 100%, but you come back on 50. Studying and assessing what that does to the fuel system, to the seals, how they respond to different fuels, and what we may have to change to the airplane and or the fuels for that to become interchangeable no matter where you are in the world. That is really the work that we're doing right now. And as I said, by 2030, we'll have that figured out and contribute our part.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And here I have a question for Flor. If kerosene becomes more heavily taxed in Europe, how likely do you think it is that airline will attempt to avoid this by loading extra fuel? In short, how could we avoid fuel tankering?
Thank you, Marilyn. I think that the first answer is that we are more and more positive that worldwide there is this trend towards putting into place their own SAF policies. We see that this is the case in the United States. We see that this is the case in the United Kingdom. I think I've got in my mind that around 18 different countries are putting in place some kind of SAF incentives and policies, which means that our impression is that more and more SAF will become a reality worldwide, and therefore there will be less and less possibilities to tanker. And secondly, as I mentioned in my 5-idea speech, we strongly believe that ICAO will do more and more on environmental matters in the future, and that through the long-term goal and CORSIA, who already has incentives for the use of SAF, we can come up to a world where everybody will see the advantage of use SAF instead of just kerosene, and tankering will not be a necessity. However, we have included in our proposal a piece of law in our draft regulation, precisely to make to incentivize the tanker in the airport where the flight will start. So the airport of taking off. And we believe that for sustainability reasons, it is much better if the plane does not fly with a lot of fuel already in the tanker, because we know that the heavier the plane, the bigger the CO2 emissions. So there is a clear environmental reason in trying to disincentivize tankering outside.
Thank you, Flor. And just because you were mentioning CORSIA, I see in the chat a question from Magnus Nilsson. EU and CORSIA use different SAF definition. How much of a problem is that? So is it something that you have considered or looked at?
I don't think it is a problem. We don't think it is a problem because the scope of ETS, who is the one using our Renewable Energy Directive sustainability criteria, and the scope of CORSIA are different. So it's we really do not think that there is a problem in having both of them compatible. We believe that both of them are compatible, and as I said, the scope is different.
Thank you, Flor. Jonas, maybe a question for you here, because you are the expert of the energy sector here. Will power-to-liquid SAF be economically viable as the energy demand seems high?
I think that's a really good question, and obviously I don't have an exact answer on, but I think we need to understand also what we compare with. So obviously, if you look at prices today, for example, SAF is not competitive compared to traditional jet fuel. But actually, if we go down the road 5 to 10 years, I think the demand and the market will actually have different demands on what we supply and how we actually, what kind of fuel we fly on. And hence, I think long-term market mechanisms will lead to a different balance. However, the key for bringing down cost is obviously also to get large-scale production. And also, as was pointed out, if we look at the energy sector, what has happened with solar panels, for example, the technology breakthrough. So when you put money somewhere, I am a great believer in what technology can do. And obviously, we cannot put all our trust in technology that is not here today. But I'm pretty sure there will come solutions if just the right mechanisms are there. And here I think, for example, the blending scheme is a great tool to demonstrate that there will be a market. And if you know that there is a market, then investors will find themselves more eager to put money there than before. And if you combine that with also having incentives for CapEx on pilot facilities, etc., I think we have come quite a long way. So I think long term, we don't have an option really. And it also depends on what you compare with. I think we cannot go forward by looking in the back mirror, right? We need to head forward, and then I think the comparison will look different.
Thank you, Jonas. Brian, I have a question for you because of this global perspective you may have, and because we also discussed about EU and CORSIA, but how would you contrast the legislative proposal in Europe on SAF to what you are seeing in other parts of the world? So this is also a question received. in advance.
Well, look, there's a lot going on in that space, and a lot of good things going on. What we're seeing are sort of a range of mechanisms that stimulate SAF uptake, but both on the demand side and the supply side. And what seems to work well in our experience are say, regulatory regimes that allow fuel producers to receive credit, which are then monetized based on the fuel carbon intensity. There are a range of market-based mechanisms that are out there that respond to consumer demand. I think renewable transport fuel obligation in the UK, you got the Dutch bio ticket, the low carbon fuel standard in California. And I mean, look, almost more than 80% of the global SAF supply comes from California these days. There has to be a reason for that. If you look at the blender's tax credit that's in place there, that begins to eliminate the price point between Jet A and SAF. I think, as I said earlier, and as Jonas said, there's an opportunity to think through sort of the incentive side of the equation now that I think the demand side has been pretty well defined. So a range of opportunities, but addressing both sides of the coin seems to be an approach that's working well in some jurisdictions. But I also welcome Flora's views on this, of course.
Thank you, Brian. I'm reading the chat and I see several questions about the non-CO2 impact or doing environmental impact assessment of producing SAF. So I think I will ask the question to Flor, but what has been done on this subject, because you speak about ensuring sustainability of SAF, so how it has been done, and the non-CO2 impact, were there considered as well or not at all?
Yes, thank you, Marilyn. I will refer the person or the people asking this question to the Commission report that was published, if I remember well, end of 2020 or I think it was end of 2019 or 2020. We issued a Commission communication with an independent report that was chaired by and led by EASA, our agency. So yes, indeed, we are analyzing and assessing very closely the impacts of non-CO2. There is still a lot of research needed and some scientific uncertainty, and this is why you will see that in the coming years of Horizon Europe, there will be research calls regarding non-CO2, but what we know already is that by using SAF, we will be reducing the fine particles, we will be reducing NOx and not only CO2. So by definition, we believe that the use of SAF will be better for the human health and for the climate than fossil fuels as we know them today.
Thank you, Flor. You are just mentioning the health. It's exactly one of the questions that has been asked. Do you expect citizen health benefits by boosting SAF use? Are there any scientific studies that has been done on this subject?
Yeah, in a sense, Marilyn, is more or less the same answer
exactly.
that I have already given. Indeed, we know that at airport level, for instance, but not only, there will be less fine particles in the atmosphere, there will be less NOx. The difference in the aromatics of the hydrocarbons is such that indeed we believe that SAF will be better and are already better for the human health. And I am sure that if they go into the Commission communication and they ask a report, they will have a lot of interesting data about that.
Thank you, Flor. And indeed, I must say that a lot of information can be found on EASA website. And then maybe a question for Jonas. I'm reading the question in the chat. If the use of SAF will be only mandatory in EU space, how will that affect the role of big hub airports? Won't airlines switch the route and connection to non-EU hub airports? So it's really with your airport background, of course, that I'm asking you this.
Yeah, I think it's a highly relevant question. Obviously, we are indeed an international industry, and hence you would prefer international solutions. But can we afford to wait until we have the perfect international solution, global international solution? Probably not. And I I think it's good that the EU is now stepping up and doing something that is common for the European Union, at least. I mean, we used to see national initiatives, aviation taxation, etc., on a national level, which doesn't make sense clearly. So having it on EU level is better. Still, the question is relevant, but on the other hand, maybe you could actually turn it around. I mean, I believe, and who knows if I'm right or wrong, but I think in not too much time, I think actually people that fly will change their attitudes, what is important. And then I think they will actually value sustainable airlines, sustainable airports in a different way compared to what we see today and what we're used to. So you could turn the question around. It might actually be a competitive advantage if you are first in doing this. Now, I understand that this is a tricky question, but honestly, my answer would be, do we have a choice? I mean, this is a global issue. It should be solved on a global level, but it's better to act now and that there are several activities going on than it's perfectly coordinated, because then nothing would have happened. I saw some other questions also in the chat on this topic. Is it a problem that we're not better coordinated? I mean, airports are doing certain things, airlines are doing other things, suppliers of fuel are doing certain things. And of course, it would be ideal to see the whole industry and the whole ecosystem going hand in hand. But I prefer that everybody's doing something than nobody's doing anything and just waiting for the perfect coordination. So I think it's better to see things are happening and people are doing what they can do. And then as we struggle along, we need to coordinate ourselves. And that's where the cooperation and being open to cooperation, both across the value chain, as I said, and also between politics and businesses comes into play. So yeah, that's the best answer I could give.
Yeah, but it's already a very good answer, very inspiring answer, at least, quite optimistic. And Jonas, if I may, because I'm also reading a last question in the chat here about the logistic part of SAF. Next to the question of the availability of SAF, there is also the question how to get it into our airports. So a lot of the major European airports are linked to the NATO pipelines for the delivery of jet fuels. Today, it's not clear whether NATO allows SAF to be transferred. So are there any solutions? Do we need extra infrastructure investment to be able to use more SAF?
I'm sorry, I cannot answer the question specifically, but I mean, if there is any solution out there where we have the possibility to use the infrastructure, it should be the SAF. So, for example, our fueling system here at Arlanda, we can blend with SAF into the traditional one, but obviously you need to look into permissions, etc., from a technology perspective before you do certain thing. And there might also be commercial obstacles before you can do it. But in general, I would say that if there is any solution which doesn't come with huge infrastructural investments, it's SAF.
I see that Flor is raising her hand. Please, Flor.
Yes, no, I just wanted to complement what Jonas was saying by saying that when we were doing our impact assessment and when we were talking to the whole sector, the stakeholders about this problem exactly, the impression that we got is that this is not a major handicap or a major problem in the European Union. We understand that the large majority of countries and the large majority of airports can use this possibility of using the NATO pipelines are there. I only have in mind one member state where I think maybe the authorization is not yet in place. And indeed, I agree with Jonas and with the person asking the question. The sooner there is this mutual recognition and acceptance by all member states and NATO that it is safe to use the same pipelines, the better for SAF, because that will reduce the price at the same time. In our proposal, we have added an obligation for EASA, for airports to report to EASA any kind of problems that they may identify. We expect that in 3-5 years maximum, we will be able to map all the infrastructure in the European Union and be sure that these small hiccups that may still happen here or there, that are anecdotal, that may still exist, through the EASA report, we will identify them and we will solve them.
Thank you, Flor. And I see that Brian will also
Yeah,
like to react.
I
Please.
agree with both Jonas and Flor, but one additional angle to this, not only will it be sort of can we use them, but will NATO pull for it, because the departments of defense increasingly around Europe are asking questions about SAF. And you know, we've had some engagements, but we see at Boeing in 2012, again, 10 years ago, we've flown an F-18 fighter jet on a SAF blend. So we've demonstrated that whether it's the fighter aircraft or a transport aircraft like the C-17, we've flown them on SAF. So the militaries around the world are engaged and are very, very interested. So I think it's a very symbiotic topic.
Thank you, Brian. I will ask a last question from the chat. So there were many different dimensions of questions, so it's quite difficult to answer to all of them. But at least, you know, I try to choose the question according to the background of our panelists today. So one last question, it's about how do you see the scale up of fuels to 2050 developing, considering the need for power to liquid SAF, hydrogen, bio-SAF, and so on. So I think it's more about hydrogen as a whole. How do we ensure that we may have enough hydrogen and enough renewable energy for this? So maybe, Jonas, do you think it's something that you could answer to, knowing your background?
It's, I mean, the million-dollar question is obviously that renewable energy and renewable electricity will be key for a lot of things. So that's a really big question, and I don't think we have time to elaborate on that, and I'm probably not the right person anyway. I think when it comes to the different kind of solutions within aviation, if I start from the user side of it, I mean, there will be different solutions for different kind of demands. So if I look at Sweden, for example, as a country, we will have most likely within 5 to 6 years, we will have commercial electric flights operational. Those will be regional, short-term flights, maybe 300 kilometers, something like that, a little bit more, opening up new possibilities for aviation, actually, that didn't used to be there. And then I think hydrogen will play an important role, probably a little bit further down the road for regional flights, such as European flights, whereas for the really, really long intercontinental flights, there will only be SAF. And again, if from the time perspective, it is SAF that is here and now. I mean, I believe in hydrogen. I'm a great believer in technology. I'm also a great believer in battery technology, what can happen in that area going forward, but it will take longer time. So we cannot afford to wait. We need to work with SAF that is here and now. Let's put the market mechanism in place. Let's make sure we have the right incentives in place to make the necessary investments in large-scale production. And let's get going. And the others should also come, but they will need longer time.
Thank you, Jonas.
Maybe Brian can help and add.
Yeah, look, just two quick points. One, there's sort of misunderstanding that you need hydrogen to produce SAF, any of the pathways. This is not about hydrogen propulsion or hydrogen fuel cells. You also need hydrogen, green hydrogen, ideally, to produce SAF. So we're very encouraged by all the investment going into hydrogen for that particular reason. And then the other point, which I think Jonas also made, is, you know, not every region has the same characteristics, and whether it's access to renewables or indeed some of the feedstock. One of the reasons we work with, among others, the Roundtable for Sustainable Biomaterials is to have experts certify that the feedstock are sustainable. But it may not work in Europe because of the characteristics, but in some other parts of the world, it may be doable and may be sustainable. But it's for them to certify that, not for us.
Thank you, Brian. And Flor, you wanted to complement or not?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that indeed in Europe, in the European Commission, we are a firm believers on hydrogen. And like Brian was mentioning, it is not only a hydrogen plane, it's hydrogen as a part of the power to liquid, is hydrogen as the way to stock energy, is hydrogen to fly, for batteries, is hydrogen everywhere. The precise question of how much hydrogen we will have by 2050, this is an answer that I don't think we can have now because there is still too much on the cards. But what I can tell you is as well that we introduced in our proposal a backdoor to be able to enlarge the scope in the future to electricity and hydrogen. At this stage, we started with an obligation for liquid fuels because this is what today is in the market, but we have already prepared the basis to be able to enlarge the target and to get hydrogen as soon as the green hydrogen is indeed available. Back to you, Marilyn.
Yeah, thank you, Flor. I think it's time to wrap up this session. I would like to thank the three panelists for this because it was very interesting discussion. But before concluding the webinar, I would like to give them a final word, just a final message to share, their main takeaway from this session. I will start by you, Flor.
Okay, my takeaway, I think what I would say is, listen, guys, SAF is here to stay. SAF is good for the health, SAF is good for the climate, and SAF is even good for the economy. If you take into account the price of the ETS and how it is going higher, SAF may end up being the economic solution for aviation. So let's stick to it, not only in the short term, but in the mid and even in the long term. I think we will keep liquid fuels for a long while in aviation.
Thank you, Flor. Thank you, Flor. Jonas?
No, I think we should remember and stick to the rule that we shouldn't allow the best to be the enemy of the good. So I think we shouldn't wait for the perfect solution. We should keep going. I think there is a lot of momentum, and I think this industry is finally now stepping up, and we need to do that. And there are a lot of opportunities out there. And no, everything is not perfectly coordinated, but a lot of things are happening, and that is good. I think the EU is now stepping up and providing some good foresights on the demand side by the introduction of a potential blending scheme. I think in general, we should recognize, though, that this industry has been bashed throughout the last 1.5 years. And hence, I think if there is any industry that also needs some carrots and not only sticks to make this transformation happen, it's probably aviation. So that would be also my take. Let's mix the sticks with some more carrots.
Thank you, Jonas. Brian?
Well, look, unsurprisingly, I'm going to be pretty aligned with probably both of my fellow panelists, but the airlines lost $130 billion last year and are expected to lose another 50 or so this year. And aviation is 4% of GDP and 87 million jobs globally. And SAF is really our license to grow if you look forward. So it is an industrial challenge, and we have to balance the mandate side with the incentive side in order to bring that curve down rapidly to decarbonize aerospace.
Thank you, Brian. So thanks to our panelists and the question discussed today, it's clear that SAF is one of the most promising solutions to decarbonize the aviation sector. It can be used now without any new infrastructure or modification to existing system and aircraft. We need to accelerate the SAF uptake, leading to a higher demand and a faster decarbonization. Of course, we also need to ensure that biofuels are really sustainable, and synthetic fuel will also play a key role in this respect, if enough renewable energy is available. For now, SAF are only certified to account for a maximum of 50% of an aircraft fuel load, but we know that trials are currently underway to demonstrate that it is already possible and safe to power cargo and commercial flight with 100% SAF. Brian told that Boeing uses SAF for all flight test programs and completed the world's first commercial flight using 100% SAF in 2018. They also plan to have commercial airplanes being capable and certified to fly on SAF by 2030. For Swedavia, a large-scale shift to biofuel is one of the most important solutions for sustainable air transport today. They set a target of 5% sustainable aviation fuel use at Swedish airport by 2025. They also implemented a sustainable aviation fuel incentive program to support airlines willing to invest in sustainable fuel area. Collaboration and knowledge sharing are vital success factors for Swedavia. The ReFuel EU Aviation Initiative objective aims to accelerate the decarbonization of the aviation with a gradual ramp-up of SAF, to break the deadlock between supply and demand and to ensure that SAF is made available to airlines at competitive prices. And finally, I would like to thank our three panelists for the great contribution and the active audience today. So stay tuned for our next webinar and see you next time. Thank you.